Hello and welcome to the Help My Wealth podcast, Money Rules or Money Rules. Here at Help My Wealth, we are all about empowering financial success in our community of listeners. We hope you find today's topic both informative and helpful. Hi, and welcome back to the Help My Wealth podcast, Money Rules, Money Rules. I'm your host, Stephen Logan, and as always with me is Hamish Ferguson. Hamish, thank you for coming along.
Oh, you're welcome, Steve. Anytime.
Our special guest today is Matt Ivers. Matt Ivers is the founder of Vision Finance in 2000, and he's worked as a licensed mortgage broker since that time. So for over 15 years, he's been specialising in investments and in property. Frustrated that his investment clients were purchasing property without strong and robust research to back up why they were doing it. In 2015, Matt went on to become a licensed buyer's agent and then on to become an accredited investment property advisor. As an accredited property investment advisor, Matt is now able to bring that robust evidence that he felt was missing in the industry to his clients and now to others. He's also the Vice President of the Australian Property Investment Association. Matt, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
How has your week been, Matthew?
Well, it's only Monday and it feels like I've done a week's worth of work.
You know, as you were giving that introduction, Steve, it reminded me that I actually became a financial advisor because I was so frustrated with how we were referring clients to other financial advisors as well. So there's a similarity in there that either Matt and I just are so pig-headed that we think we're the only ones that...
I think there's a bit of both.
It is true. Like when you talk to a lot of professionals, I think that is, we tend to go where we like, don't we? We go to what interests us. And if you've got an area where you're like feeling there's a hole here, I'm frustrated that my clients aren't being serviced, it's a natural progression to go that direction. So, you know, more power to both of you for doing that actually. And I really want to delve into that, Matt, later on to ask why you felt that, you know, what was actually happening in the industry. But for right now, tell us, Matt, what's happened to you for the rest of this week? You've had a big first day. Are you going to chill out, or is it just going to continue on?
No, it's a big week. I've got sort of quite a lot of client files to do, and I think you're going to touch on it later. But when we put the what we call a property investment evaluation plan together, it's a lot of work. So I've got a lot of that to do this week and to present to my clients, which is the fun bit. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, look, fantastic. Well, let's get into it. One of the things I wanted to ask you was actually around that career move. I mean, that's a big move to go from solely being a mortgage broker to actually going, hang on, I want to really get around investment property and investment property advice. So for you, you know, what brought you to that? What was your reason for doing that?
Honestly, it was my mortgage broking team that pushed me into it. Mm. So we had a lot of clients. I was an investment lending specialist, really, and then we saw, you know, some pretty poor results and some poor advice, and my team just went, well, we should bring it internally and do it, and so they pushed me into it very reluctantly.
Yeah. I mean, look, we've talked about it before on here. You know, when an investor comes to you or when a client comes to you and they say, I've got $750,000, where should I spend it? You know, you can put it here, or here. And it's really about finding that best possible investment for them, being able to forecast as much as you can with the information that you have. And if you don't have the right research, if you don't have the right basis to go from, well, then the person's just, you know, might as well just use a dartboard, hey?
Correct. Yeah, there's a lot. There's in the property investment space, it's not properly regulated. It sort of falls between two industries. You know, like there's credit advice, which can take in cash flow, and there's financial planning, and it just sort of, and a real estate license, which is just a traditional retail business. But there's not an actual specific sort of license to be a property advisor, which I think's a shame. But the things that we learned from the financial planning industry and the mortgage broking industry is if you follow a nice process, then you can deliver really good results. And that's what we want to bring to this space.
So I wanted to ask you, I know I've talked to you before about, your frustration with what we'll call bad eggs, people who were doing the wrong thing and not doing, the best for their client. You had quite a good example of that where you actually were taken on ABC and actually had to talk about that, didn't you?
Yeah, now there's a particular a bad egg. So I think this goes public, so I'll just stick with bad egg. But there was a particularly awful person who really just used his position of trust and abused it to put people in terrible situations that cost hundreds of people their homes. And so I was involved in bringing that forward to ASIC and trying to help those people. So, and that was sort of almost the final straw. We need to get in and clean up this industry, because even though he'd done such a terrible thing to these people, there was no real fallback on the guy because it's not actually properly regulated. So whereas if that was in financial planning or from a credit perspective, he'd be in jail now.
Yeah. So look, let's move forward from that then and go, what are now you hoping to achieve in regards to actually bringing that robust evidence? I mean, you talked about the property evaluation plan that you do for your clients. What does that entail? What are the sort of things that you're actually going to do for people that you believe gives them, an evidence base to be able to make a good decision?
Yeah, well, the first thing that you sort of need to uncover is what is the person trying to achieve. So a lot of people in the property space just have the mindset of, if I buy a property, I'll make money. And they don't really, they know that it's a good asset class and that it's traditionally done very well, but they don't really have the purpose in mind of why they're doing it other than they make money. So the first thing we do is we work out, okay, you want to make money, but what's the purpose and what are you trying to achieve in the end? Yeah. So, and we try and break that down to, well, how long are you willing to invest in this area for what goal? And so that might be a weekly figure of income when they're ready to retire. And so we start with that. Yeah. So we model backwards. So it's not really about the property. It's about how the asset class can achieve that particular part of their goal.
And Hamish, you've spoken about that before in regards to investment, like understanding asset classes and what the risks are for each asset class, as well as what are the good, what are the bad points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I quite often say to people that, whether it's property, whether it's super, whether it's shares, they're all tools. They're all tools to help you reach a certain point. And each tool, just like you might think of, a carpenter, they pick up a hammer because it does a certain job. They pick up a drill because it does a certain job. And property and the different asset classes all have different purposes. So property investment, isn't bad. It's just you got to make sure you align the goal with the property, with and what the capacity of the person is. I guess, Matt, if you'd agree with that, and hopefully, it all comes together.
Yeah. And for you, Matt, what are you saying to most of your clients is the length of time that someone needs in this asset class to be able to see, some growth and to be able to see the sort of results they're wanting to achieve?
Oh, look, you'd at least want one cycle, It's which is 10 years. I think that's 10 years. Otherwise you're speculating. And in the property space, it's expensive to get into it and it's expensive to exit it. Yeah. And it's a bit like a slow moving train, like even the best forecasters, and I sort of read everyone's reports, they'll often be out by a couple of years. They might be in the right city and the right place, but it might be 2 years after they expected it to go up that it does. Yeah. So you just got to play that patience, So, it's the same. Hamish, should be the same with your shares. You really make most of your money towards the end. So the longer you're in, much more money you make. Like when we do the modelling and you go from, a 10 to a 20 to a 25 years, the difference is huge in the even if you use, conservative growth figures like 4%, that's massive difference.
And I've got to keep reminding my clients of that. I'm sure you do as well, that, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this for 10 years. And then they'll start saying to me, okay, at 10 years, what do we start doing? And I'm like, look, let's just get to 10 years. And then you can sit down with your, financial advisor, your property investment advisor, your accountant, and go, what's the best situation? Do we stay in here? Do we exit? What do we do? But just to start off with, have that as your goal and then start moving forward. Don't feel as though you've got to have everything, in a line ready to go to know what you're going to do from now for the next 35 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's a game of patience, effectively. Yeah. If you want to be safe and you don't want to, like, for want of a better word, risk your house, it's a game of
100%. So you've talked about the risk and looking at the risk profile for clients and also for the property. What are the other things that you look for to say to people, hey, I think this is you've got your 750,000. This is where I think it's best for us to spend it. What are the other areas that you look at?
Yeah, so the next thing after you sort of work the goal is the lending side. So obviously I'm lucky that I had experience in lending. So when it comes to lending, they look at two different things, like how big is your deposit or how much equity you've got. Mm-hmm. And then they'll look at your servicing, which is your monthly cash flow. Yeah, your monthly cash flow. And if you've got a borrower that could borrow $1 million based on their deposit, but 500,000 based on their servicing, then the bank will lend them $500,000. Yeah. So they lend the lower of the two. So what's really important, because finance is the key to being successful in property investment, is that you understand what their strength is and their weakness is. And that helps you focus on what style of property they should head in. So if your weakness is servicing, so that's going to stop you from buying another property, then you need to pick a property that's going to minimize or maximize the income for you to be able to borrow again. Because what probably a lot of people don't understand is banks will shave off 20% of the rent. They'll add 3% to the interest rate. So even though your reality is you might have a positively geared property, when they go to view you to borrow the money, they'll be looking at you as if you're negative. So it's very important to have a really good finance plan around your property investment strategy.
So, Matt, if I could ask you a question about that. So, I guess, somebody just in the street might hear that and go, well, surely cash flow is king. We've all heard that saying before. I mean, what's a reason to not focus on cash flow? Like, even if I've got strong servicing, shouldn't I focus on cash flow anyway?
That's a good one. So it all depends on the individual, right? But let me give you an example of a client who's a young person, yeah, and they haven't got a lot of savings, but they're on big money, Let's just say they're on 250 grand with better prospects, but they're in their early 20s and they haven't got a huge deposit and they haven't got a family commitment. Yeah, they're living the life of Riley. Good time, Charlie, right? So in their case, they will benefit more from having something that leans towards capital growth. Yeah. So now a capital growth play, generally in my world, it doesn't have particularly good cash flow. So you might buy a house on say a 4,000 square metre block that's sort of near some infrastructure that's likely to be subdivided or it's capable of being subdivided now. Yeah. So when you look at the cash flow on that, it's going to be pretty awful. It's going to be negative geared, right? But the advantage of that, say it cost $1 million to buy that, yeah? But the realisation of that property, once it's been developed or subdivided, is $3 million, yeah? So even before you develop it. So if there's 10% growth in that area, if it was just a normal house, it'd make you 100. But because the 10% is on the realised value, he'd make 300,000 from that lot, potentially from that 10% growth. It's really simple numbers, but that's when you wouldn't focus on cash flow because that person's servicing is strong, but they really just need to make more money to get ahead. Yeah. And they're on a higher tax bracket, so they get a better. So yeah.
And so, look, that's a really good example. So, on the flip side, where would give us an example of someone that you would be wanting to, have a higher return on investment, more cash flow coming in?
Yeah, so a classic a classic mum and dad client. The kids are in school. They're paying off a big mortgage. As you know, my business is based in Sydney, so there's no such thing as a small one. There's just bigger ones. They would want a cash flow property because they would want the help. That they basically want that property to really not drain on their own personal cash flow, so they can live their lives and build, for their future investment, and ideally that it could help them pay off their mortgage. So it's a really good high cash flow property, then that can deliver a couple of $100 a month, off the mortgage. That help mortgage is a really good start, and investment properties can do that. If it's the right selection.
And so you talk about doing a property investment analysis, or what we call a PIA. Can you explain to us what picture does that actually paint for the person when you actually do that for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a PIA is basically showing the cash flow of an individual property, right? But probably the biggest surprise I get, and it still surprises me to this day, is that people, when they go to buy an investment property, they haven't considered the cash flow of it at all. They don't look at the cash flow, but those same people, if they were going to go and buy a business and say what would be the first thing you'd look at, and they go, well, look at the cash flow and the profit. So it's exactly the same principle for an investment property. Well, what does it look like? Is it going to lose me a lot of money? Is it going to break even and we're going to rely on it to go up, or is it actually going to give me a return on my money now? So a PIA is basically designed to do that, mate. So it can very accurately tell you how much that property will cost you on a weekly or monthly basis, and you can also use it to run hypotheticals on the capital growth. Where it'll be, how where will it be in 5 years? What could be the value? What could be the value in 10, 20, 15 years? So to me, it's an essential tool.
So you've done all of this for the property, and what do you do when it comes to actually choosing where are we going to go? Those sort of macro and micro geographical influences. What helps you to determine that?
Lots of things, Steve. So there's a lot of people that it's their whole career is effectively looking at the data and trying to predict which market is going to go up next. I certainly read a report every year and subscribe to a report that forecasts the major cities, and it's all data driven. It's all data driven on what's the affordability, what's the outlook for employment. It's such a large web.
So I remember hearing a story, so tell me if this is true, that before we had a lot of those big data tools that were available to us now just to check and see quite easily, when you had to get journals and paper thing coming in, you actually sat there one day and put every journal across the table and circled everything and brought all the data together manually. Is that true?
That's true. That was the bad old days, Steve. I had all the investment magazines. So there's a particular statistic called days on market, which measures basically from the time a person lists a property to how long they sell it, right?
Yes.
So if you and one figure in isolation doesn't tell you what's going on, but if you can work out the trend, you can. So back in the day, I'd got the magazines and I'd put them out, almost the last 5 years, and I'd circle the suburb and I'd try and pick the trend. And it was a very painstaking process. But these days, unfortunately, we've got the IT system, and it does that in less than 10 seconds, So I can and it graphs it beautifully, so I can tell straight away what's going on in a suburb.
Yeah. I know, Hamish, you said to me when I first heard of the name Matt Ivers, it actually came up because you introduced me to Matt, and you were saying that your frustration from the mortgage broking point of view, that you also didn't have this evidence. And you were saying, oh, look, this guy's starting to develop this really cool, robust evidence that I can actually show my clients and say, look, this is good. So from your point of view, since 2015, when Matt started this to where it is now, how's that been for your clients?
Oh, it's been great. I mean, one of the things that it's just always dumbfounded me is that, somebody will just, if they come to me and say, Hamish, I've got $500,000 to spend, all right, if I just sort of said, let's just open up the ASX and we'll just look at what stocks traded the most yesterday and we'll just buy the top 5, people would just look at me and go, have you got rocks in your head? There's no way I'm giving you $500,000.
Sarah, can you set up the target board? I've got a client here, needs to throw something.
But people would just say, I can just jump onto Domain and I can just look at property and I can go and check out a few open houses and Bob's your uncle. Poor Bob, we've given him such a bad name. So, but, so just hearing this data come through in this, okay, we can never get it 100% right, but, knowing that there's a process, as Matt said, and that, we're following the science, if we can use that phrase, I think it's really important and it's good.
Yeah. Have you seen a difference in I mean, it's sort of almost been 10 years now since Matt's been sort of doing this. Have you seen a difference in the way clients have felt confident in their investments and also in the results of that?
Oh, look, I would definitely say, the good news is that the clients that we've referred to, Matt, I haven't had any bad stories. So,
that's a relief.
But let's also bear in mind, like there's some good stories in there as well. But we're at the 8-year mark, aren't we?
Yeah.
All right. So in terms of, and probably that first sort of 6 or 12 months, Matt, you probably didn't do a lot. It was probably more just getting in, learning what you were doing, and that sort of thing. So that's the good news, is that there's no clients that would say, I regret going down this path of being referred through to Matt and the team. And we're not at that 10-year mark yet. All right. So I think that's important, if that makes sense.
Well, I think you should call some of those clients, because the last couple of years they've killed it, mate.
Oh, absolutely.
Look, one of the things I wanted to bring up, Matt, was, I spoke to you about this new tool that you've developed, this mortgage reduction calculator, because it's one of those things that clients will often bring up. I've got a mortgage, I want to get investment, how's it going to work together? So tell us, what have you actually developed here, and how's that been helping your clients to be able to get a visual of what you're trying to explain to them?
Yeah, so, because it must be because I've just got this strong mortgage broking background. So one of the things is if you get rid of your home loan, it just makes your life so much better, right? So even though we're in the game of like giving people a home loan, it's not a debt we want them to keep. Yeah, rather they have the good debt, bad debt, right? A home loan's, it's the best bad debt, right? So there's a few different ways to pay it off. Like one is the hard slog of just throwing more money at it, yeah, which we should do. 100%, that's what we should do. The other thing is to just regularly review your mortgage. If you can just get a better rate, but you maintain that repayment, that can save you. It's not huge, but it can save you a few years, and a few years adds up to 40, 50 grand, depending on the mortgage. Yeah. But the other way is you can use an investment property. So obviously when rates are lower, it works really well because a lot of things are positively geared, and then you can take that positive cash flow and throw it off your mortgage. And the other one is you can use the capital growth. So at some point, if you've invested in a property and it's not really that big a drain on your cash flow, yeah, but it grows over time, your 10, 15 years, you can sell that down and clear your mortgage.
Yeah.
So there's 3 different strategies. I would say a combination of all 3 is ideal. And so this tool demonstrates the effect of those things individually and combined.
And it does it in a really pretty way. That's what I love about it. It's actually, it's graphical, it's visual. And so it makes the average person who's not a mortgage broker, financial advisor, or a property advisor to be able to see it and go, oh, I get it. I get what you're doing here. That actually looks really good. It's a forecast. It's saying this is what we're hoping we'll achieve over 10, 20 years, but it makes it really effective and really easy to be able to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. It's really good having, like, I've got a fella called John Moore who's helping me develop this. I could never do it on my own. I did it in spreadsheets and they were messy. And for him to put it in the software and produce these beautiful reports, it's a massive bonus for everyone.
Yeah.
And we're visual creatures more often than not these days. We actually need a picture to be able to understand what's going on. You give somebody 20 pages of information, and half of us don't have the patience to get through it. So actually being able to articulate it in a way that is just straightforward and digestible, I think is really important.
Yeah, and to be honest, I've done similar things, with spreadsheets, and you can say to the person, "See, look at this spreadsheet. Look what it's showing you," and you can see the glaze on their eyes as they go, "Yeah, it's great," because the average person just doesn't want to see spreadsheets or numbers. So having it visual is the key, I think.
Great, and that's why you come to people who specialise in those areas.
Yeah, 100%.
Because these days the whole world, we're all specialists, right?
Yeah.
And we really just have to pick the right partner. Because if you're not a specialist, you're not on top of your game these days, right?
Yeah. Look, another question I wanted to put forward to you. I mean, look, everyone's talking about high interest rates, where it is at the moment. Not everywhere, but a lot of property sales have slowed down. The price of property looks to be stabilising. I mean, obviously I'm being very general here, but, with those large percentage rises that we've seen over the last year or so with interest, where is this a good time to buy property? I mean, as a property investment advisor, what are you saying to your clients?
Yeah, well, the big thing that I'm seeing in our space is the absolute lack of supply. Yeah, so there's a rental crisis for me, absolutely looming. You can see it everywhere. I think we're historically probably the lowest we've ever had nationally in vacancy rates. They're just about non-existent. So it is definitely a good time to purchase. Yeah, depends on the market. You've really got to pick if you can afford it with the higher interest rate level. Yeah. And that's not going to last. That's trying to solve a problem. That problem, once it's on top of, they'll loosen the shackles on that. Yeah. And when they loosen the shackles on that, it'll be game on, because it's so short on stock that I can only, and it's dreadful, I can only see it going up from that point. As soon as borrowing capacities are increased again, it'll be game on, because it just doesn't make sense to rent, because the rent is so much, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've only got to read, any newspaper you pick up, and there's a story about someone who can't rent. They've got a good job. They've got they're professionals, and they're just unable to rent somewhere. So that's actually a very truthful statement.
Yeah, it's really quite sad, really, that the people with the least amount of money can't even really afford to rent in many places, or rent where they certainly want to live.
Yeah.
And I can only see that getting worse, because we've really come off a self-induced building boom, right? So to get through COVID, the government obviously stimulated housing. The RBA stimulated with rates. Yeah. So there was a lot of houses built, during that period, and it was pushed through, and there was no immigration, right? And we still ran out of property. Yeah. And so now we've got immigration, and now we've got higher interest rates, so people are investing less, and a lot of investors who had, poor cash flow properties, because they probably didn't understand the weight of it, and certainly when it went from 2% to 5.5% to 6%, they've dumped it. It's been bought by owner occupiers, and there's less stock.
Yeah.
So if you can afford to invest this time, and you understand your cash flow, understand the cash flow. If you can afford, it will pay off later, because when rates come back down, that property will switch very quickly into positively geared, and away you go.
So that leads me on to another question. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this, Matt, but, we've sort of seen information over the years talking about, like during COVID, there was all these houses that were empty because of them turning into holiday houses. You've also got this, I guess, question mark around the number of people in each dwelling, right, slowly dropping down over time, because we're having less kids. And I think there's quite a high proportion of people that like or choose to live on their own these days. So are you seeing that sort of come through in the style of houses being built and things like that, or not really?
It's definitely, like, you can see apartments and townhouses and smaller houses are catering from it. You know, like even like rooming houses. You know, like a rooming house is like a flash boarding house. You know, where they've got almost a studio apartment sharing with 5 other people, and the take up of them is massive. Yeah. Oh. So it's how people are choosing to live, but I don't believe that the planning, you know, the planning level at all state government levels is anywhere near good enough or to deal with what's coming yet, or it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be a bit reactive. It seems to be behind the ball. You know, like, you can see we've got a crisis now, but if you were to build a big apartment block, from go to woe, so I mean one, you know, that's at least a couple of 100, 300, that's a 5-year minimum project, you know, and that's only 200 units that may look after 400 people. You know, so I'm a bit worried. I think the biggest issue that we'll see the next federal election will be a housing crisis.
I can actually see that too. I think you're right. I think that is going to become talked about more and more in the media and in the public. I read recently that the government spent, I can't remember how many $1 billion it was on revamping all of the community housing and social housing, and by the end of it, they were actually 100 houses or 100 units less than what they were when they started, because so many of them had to actually be demolished and pulled down because they were no longer structurally right. So, they started the project thinking they're going to increase the amount of social housing they had, and by the time they finished it, they actually had decreased it by 100 houses. I mean, the rest of them were all beautifully new and renovated, but still, in negative. And that's just going to continue.
Yeah, and even if you throw a huge amount of money at it at the moment, you just don't have, there's not the people to just build it. Yeah. There's just... if you look for coming out of it, the pipeline's getting better now, but there was just not enough people to get the work done. And I mean, there wasn't enough builders and there wasn't enough supply, and there was a big issue in the industry that came out of COVID, but there wasn't enough town planners to approve stuff, so it was, it was hyped up and it sort of blew it up. But the problem we've got now is, with the interest rates being high and the stock that was built and came through, it's still not helped the vacancy rate levels. And I'm not talking from an investment perspective. I'm talking from a healthy Australia perspective. The problem is, now we've got higher interest rates. There's less interest. You haven't got your mum and dad normal investors that just aren't going to want to invest because they're struggling under their own mortgage. They're not thinking about getting another one where a property is going to take more money off them at this point, so...
Totally. And look, to touch back on that interest rate thing, I had I talked to a client recently who brought that up in a bit of a worry. Is this the right time? And I said to them, look, I always say to my clients, I need you to do the figures and do the numbers and talk to your mortgage broker and your accountant and so forth, because, example, a year or two ago, we're at 2%. We're not going to stay here. Interest rates are going to go up. Interest rates are going to go down. Property is a 10-year, 20-year game. It's not going to stay at 2% for the whole 10 years, And so now we've got a situation where interest rates are high, and it's the same conversation in reverse. It's just saying, okay, this is the higher end of the game. Do you know what I mean? Talk to your mortgage broker, your financial planner, your accountant, get advice around that. But we can expect that over the next 10 years, it's going to go down again and then go back up again. So I think it's funny. It's one of those things where when interest rates are low, people have this really positive, optimistic outlook and don't want to consider what the cost might be if interest rates go up. But when interest rates are higher, they're actually being able to get in with a much greater understanding of what their cash flow is and what they can afford as well. So sometimes for some of my clients, it's actually not a bad time because, they're really understanding the risk, they're really understanding the reward, and they're really understanding what their outlay is going to be for this investment property.
Mm-hmm. And I want to be really careful here. Sorry, Matt. Is that we've all been sort of bred to use these words like, interest rates are so high, all right? So whereas correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but we spent the first 10 years working as a mortgage broker where the average interest rate was 6.5%, 7%. All right, so rates actually, and I want to be careful here because there's obviously a bit of pain out there and people aren't enjoying this change of interest rates. And I'm not necessarily saying that rates are going to go up terribly much further either, but we have to put it in perspective that the rates we're currently paying at the moment are historically high.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to change your mood.
No, that's exactly what I was getting at as well. So Matt, look, we talked about the ideas of different areas. So, do you sort of see in Australia there's a bit of a property clock that, it might be good in Melbourne one year, might be good in Brisbane another year, might be good in, Adelaide another year, but essentially your job is to look around Australia at where currently now is going to be the best place to actually put your money, because Hamish and I have talked before that often people want to invest next door. They want to invest somewhere where they know. They want to invest in a suburb that they actually are a bit more aware of, and it's one of the things we have to try to explain to them is go, look, I get that. It's nice the idea that you can see your investment property if you go for a drive for 10 minutes. But at the same time, you can't go into it. You can't just knock on the door and go for a walkthrough. You have to trust your leasing agent to be the one that's actually going to do that work for you. So whether it's in Brisbane, Perth or Adelaide, in reality, it's not going to change. So therefore, it's about going which area, which city, which suburb is the best for me right now. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yeah, 100%. Like it's really only first-time investors who feel that way, and it's our job to try and explain that. Trust me, when you buy this place, you'll never ever look at it again. Probably, like if you ask most of your clients, they'll go and see it at the time of the purchase, and then they pretty much it just pops out of their head until it's time maybe to sell it. Yeah. So, but you can understand why they're nervous. They understand that market. That's the market they understand. But it really is our job to explain that yes, that this property could be one, but we really need to put the merits forward of something else so that they feel comfortable in stepping out of that zone. But definitely, it's very, very rare that the best opportunity for you is next door. Very rare. The odds are very, very low. Yeah.
So are you willing to talk to our audience and let them know where your head is at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I think you talked about a property clock, right? So normally there is one. Yeah, normally there's a bit of a property clock, and it depends where you start on the clock. But if you were going to start, like, say, in Sydney, Sydney might go first. Say that's the first market that went up, and it's usually interest rate driven city because of the expense, the affordability, closely followed by Melbourne. And then those markets generally go up, and then people find it a stretch and get sick of it and feel overwhelmed by that market. So then you get interstate migration, they might go to Queensland, over to Adelaide, or potentially over to Perth. Yeah, that's the normal cycle. What we saw in COVID was everywhere was a bit quiet, and then everywhere took off at the same time because they overstimulated. I've never seen that before, but that's what happened, and it's 1 year. But you can see the corrections coming, right, for the markets that were really overstimulated. Yeah, so that's your Sydneys. They'd already come off a pretty good run. That's your Melbournes. They're coming off. Brisbane went up probably too much, too quick. It's coming off a bit, but I still think it's a pretty good market to look at. It's got a good story coming. Adelaide's done pretty well, but a market like Perth, which is sort of shut out and really hasn't done a lot since the mining boom. It's really only just coming in. The figures there, the data that we look at, it's lining up. It's lining up really well. So it all depends on the individual circumstances, but certainly I've got a very strong eye for that market in Western Australia at the moment.
And it's interesting, there was a point in time there where they almost talked about Perth exceeding property prices in Sydney. I remember back in the
very close.
2000s. You know, it was very, you know, it was interesting. And then Perth's just been quiet ever since, hasn't it?
It has, but it can be explained because basically they had their mining boom, right? So when you have a mining boom, it's really intensive to start when you set up all the mines. So you have to have lots of people in. But once they're set up, then there's really sort of the maintenance team. So that huge labour force that was attracted over there then moved back east. Yeah. But there's nothing particularly mining boom going on in WA. It's just been in the doldrums for so long. You know, like affordability, I don't remember the exact numbers, but just home loan affordability over there is like at 20-something%, you know, whereas Sydney's like 60. Now, what people probably don't understand, but the people in Perth earn as much money as the people in Sydney. Like just that alone, you know.
So sorry, Matt, just to clarify that. So when you say 20% versus 60%, so you're saying 20% of household income is going into service the debt, right? So,
Correct,
so there's 3 times.
It might be like 27. You know what I mean? In Perth, but it's at least half as much as Sydney, right? You require half as much, but they earn just as much. So just the sheer capacity of that state to afford for the houses to go up, they can cope with it. So if you look at the data now and who's going backwards and who's staying fine or even got growth, it's those cities where a big increase in the interest rate doesn't really bother them too much because their mortgages are small, right?
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, Matt, you finished?
No, you go. No, I was done.
Right, okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, just for the listeners. So a bit of an average for mortgages is you sort of know a property market is affordable when it's under 30 and it's starting to heat up a bit when it gets sort of into those mid sort of 40s, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. Correct.
So 60%, obviously, if it does get that high, is quite detrimental, but 20s is good.
Plus, I think I wouldn't have the figures off my head, but I think Perth actually had quite a lot of population influx as well after COVID as well. So there was more than a few people going, do I want to move to Brisbane? Do I want to move to Perth? And so a lot of those outlying areas got a lot of Sydney and Melbourne's population as well, you know.
And it's interesting.
Yeah, and
no, you go, mate.
Yeah, so I was going to say, and the big thing, what we didn't have was overseas migration, right? So one of the things that probably works against a market like Perth is it's just so far away from your family, right? So if you live in Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, you're like a 1 hour, 2 hour flight to get to your family. But obviously Perth, it's a 4 hour flight, so it's a bit too far. But so when they don't have international migration, because international people don't care, they'll just look at the city. And, is it a really nice city? Oh, this place is heaps more affordable and I get paid more money because they're not tied to family. Yeah. So they're going to pick up a lot of that. And if I don't know if you've been to Perth recently, but you can see it. It's a very multicultural place.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you a question going back to being a investment property advisor, and being involved in the Property Association of Australia, the Investment Property Association of Australia. How has that actually helped you, personally with both yourself, with your own finances, but also with your own clients? Like, has that changed your outlook over the last 10 years of how you view property and how you go about actually choosing property?
Yeah. Amazing, like huge difference. Yeah. Just even after I did the course, it changed my view on the way I look at property, because you find that until you make your decisions with the influence of data, and understanding issue, you will often think other markets are like the market that you've experienced, and you won't see the nuances between the markets. So. Like I would have a Sydney view because I, grew up mainly in Sydney and spent 20 years there. So I would place a Sydney view across another city, and rather, but when you look at the data and you look at what people are doing, that view may or may not be correct. So it's a massive difference. Massive difference. Like you can apply it. Like Sydney's a mature market, so you can apply things that might happen, but you might apply them too early, right? You might be too early. Yeah. For example, apartments in Brisbane, right?
Yeah.
You think in Sydney apartments are strong, right? Strong because it's so expensive to buy a house. But if you bought apartments in Brisbane, say 7 or 8 years ago, yeah, over a house, that was a bad investment decision. Yeah. But if you bought a house, you cleaned up.
Yeah.
And the reason was because people afford to buy a house. So they're not going to buy an apartment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I always talk about with clients is especially being a buyer's agent myself, is, it's really important to try and find a professional that's actually got a professional body they're associated with. You're the Vice President of the Property Investment Association of Australia, and I'm a member of that as well. But I wanted you just, in your own words, to explain to people why, in this industry that is a bit deregulated and doesn't have that sort of regulation that other industries do, why is it important to have these associations, or to even ask, is your buyer's agent a part of that association?
Because they have a professional code of conduct. And then they have to follow. So even though there's no particular licensing or compliance regime put on them, the industry body puts it on them, on their members. Yeah. So they have to follow a certain process. So one of the reason why it was founded, the membership is to do that. And because a lot of what happens in the industry is people find some stock and then justify that to their client.
Yes.
Whereas it should be, what does your client need, and go and find it. Yeah. Yes. And so what is the compliance regime about doing that? And that's what the association's about. And so the members that are within it have to follow that protocol.
Yeah, because you often see it especially on social media these days, a buyer's agent will be saying, I've got this property here. And it does make me go, hang on, you've already got a property and now you're looking for a client. Like, it seems to be a little bit reverse around. I know that they're not selling that property, but they've still found a property that they're now going, this is a good option for someone to buy, but they haven't actually gone through that process with their client to find out what that client needs.
Correct. If it shouldn't work that way. Like, I just hope that those ads, then they go and assess the client, and then they say, well, maybe this is not right for you. But I do know the industry, and unfortunately, that's generally how it operates.
And it's interesting because you guys may or may not have seen, there was a recent Four Corners show on real estate as an industry, and one of the things that they did was they focused on 2 or 3 agents. You guys see this at all? No? Yeah.
I heard about it. I didn't actually see it myself. Yeah.
I did see it. And it was Newcastle based.
Oh, look, yes. Thanks for bringing that up. But I find it interesting when there's this line that says, but I'm following the letter of the law.
Yes.
And I'm not quoting him, but sort of similar to what one of the guys said.
Yes.
And isn't that's really that key difference with a professional association, isn't it? It's asking its members to go, not just to manipulate the law or to stay out of trouble, but it's this best interest duty, like what mortgage broking has had, and financial planning's been through that as well. It's actually saying, what does the client need, and how do we make sure the client is protected as much as possible through this process? Would you agree with that, Matt?
Oh, I couldn't, Matt. When people say, I'm just following the law, that says everything about them, right?
Yeah.
Because they're basically saying, I can justify my disgraceful behaviour because there's no law to stop me from doing it, right? Yeah. So, and you're absolutely right. Like, at best interest duty, that's in the mortgage broking space and in the financial planning space, I wish it was in this space because that would clean it up a lot. That would clean up this industry substantially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the association, your association, pushing for that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like John Moore, who he's been pushing that this property advice space be a national licensed regime for a decade. And I think there's been a misconception that if you put the regime over the brokers, then that would clean it up. But the brokers regime does not stop a person giving bad property advice. Yeah, it doesn't. I think that think it was Labor. It was the Kevin Rudd government thought that when they first introduced it to us that would tidy that up, but it just hasn't been the case at all yet.
Well, hopefully you guys can keep pushing that in the political, world and get to a point where it's better for our clients and safer for the Australian public.
That'd be great. It'd be great if we could get to that point. But in the meantime, let's I figure let's just try and practice that. Get as many people following that regime and like you can see with the broker industry, when they just really pushed hard and the vast majority of brokers put their best interests at heart, you see what happens. They've got 70% market share now. And it's because most brokers are looking after their friends and family and doing the right thing by them,
Yeah, it's always the way, isn't it? Like the average professional is doing the right thing. It's that very small percentage that aren't that then make it bad for everybody else. But it's important that you have associations like the the PIAA to actually bring those ethics and morals into the industry.
Correct. Yeah, and if you create a regime that actually is beneficial for the client, and beneficial for all the stakeholders. Like if you set it up that way, then you'll get good behaviour even from the bad people.
Yeah.
Which would be ideal, right?
So, Matt, sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I know this wasn't one of the questions that we sort of talked about earlier on, but I'm just really interested if you're going to tell somebody off the street, like if you weren't in the industry, a bit of a checklist, or how do you tell the bad eggs from the good in your industry? What are some signs that they should be looking for?
That's a really good question, Hamish. They'll over promise. So they'll say things like you'll get 10% or 20% capital growth, straight away. If they make any promise around the capital growth that you'll get, they're lying because you don't know, right? You can only really state the facts that would present a good case for capital growth. We don't know what the number is. The best forecasters in Australia get it wrong all the time. Yeah. So if they're claiming that's a big red flag. The other one is do your own homework. So a thing that I've saw a lot as a investment lender is that they would quote clients like, say, $1,000 a week. You'll get $1,000 a week in rent, right? There's no way they were getting $1,000 a week in rent. They're getting $600. So you can do simple things like go on realestate.com or any other sites and have a look at something that's equivalent to what they're saying to you and see what rent they're getting. Yeah, check it out, because over-promising on rent is a common one because it makes the cash flow look better and they try and sell you on that, but the actual fact is it's not true, right? It's not actually true. The other one is that always gets me is I've got 15 properties and I'm 28 and I'm 28 years old and I've got a $10 million portfolio. It's just not true. The only way they could possibly have that is by committing fraud, and they'll come unstuck from doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Or they're a multimillionaire to start off with.
Or the
multimillionaires,
inheritance.
Well, they're multi-million, but they should disclose that. Well, I got $10 million, so that's why I've got that many places. And and if they drive it around in some sort of really super, Ferrari or Lamborghini, plus they're 28 years old and they've got a $15 million portfolio, no, they've probably gleaned a lot of people of a lot of money, rather than actually built their portfolio by themselves with their job at Woolworths. It's just not true. It's not true. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And a bit of a reverse on that, which is something I think you brought up earlier on, is just something I've picked up from tonight is almost the person that won't put anything in writing, right? Which is sort of what you're doing, isn't it? You're trying to change the industry by saying, let me put my advice in writing.
Correct. Yeah. No, like if we recommend something to someone after their personal assessment, it's about a 20-page document that we get them to sign off on, and they get a copy of it. And if we put anything there that's not true with it, they can come back at us. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, look, Matt, I've really enjoyed this conversation and really enjoyed, the advice that you've offered today. One of the things we always ask our guests is that if you could go back to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell them?
Oh, Is this like from a professional perspective? Or?
From what?
Yeah.
As long as it's clean, but yeah, no, just in general, like, the advice you've got, whether it's professional or personal, what would you be saying to that 18-year-old self if you could do it?
Well, the 18, look, I was gonna bash myself and say, you should have bought more property earlier, right? But I did get in pretty early. But you definitely, if you can, as a young 18-year-old, don't go for the shiny things like the flash car and the flash and the holidays. If you can balance it and just save a bit of money to get your start, you will just be so much better off in the future. Like, if we demonstrate all the time, right, as advisors, the effects of compound interest, and if you can get in early as an 18-year-old or as early as you can, you just get that much more time, and you'll just come out so much more comfortable later in your life. As you guys know, we're in our 50s, and we're raising families, and you know what I mean. And if you imagine if you had a big portfolio when you're 18, 20, you start investing earlier, how much easier your life would be, right?
Oh, 100%. And for me, it was actually about I started doing well when I started seeking professionals' help. Do you know, like I didn't know what I didn't know. And we've discussed this before, Hamish, but, I've referred personal friends, to yourself even before they're ready to get a mortgage, saying just have a conversation, because it's amazing how quickly they can go from where they are to getting a mortgage or getting investment property by getting advice from the right people, because they just don't know what they don't know. Would you agree with that, mate?
Yeah, like one of the good traits, mate, is 100% you should get advice from people, but also a really good trait to work on is working out who are genuine people, who genuinely want to help you.
Absolutely.
So if you can work on that, because most people are genuine, right? But the ones who aren't are pretty sneaky. So you want to pick them and test them. Yep. So be optimistic, but be a little bit cynical about their advice and check it out. Yeah.
And ask the questions.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Ask the questions. Don't take it for granted that they've got your best interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, but believe it, but test it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, another question we always ask people is, if you were going to write a book, what would the title be and what would the book be about?
Yeah, I saw that question.
I've stumped him.
I saw that question, and then I couldn't write it. The one I was thinking of writing, I think I always get back to this book. I think like Confessions of a Mortgage Broker. Like, it's just stupid, right? So we can tell the stories of what we've seen that would help people. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of investors do very well, and a lot do get themselves in all sorts of pickles that we saw it. So it's not, I don't know if it's Confessions of a Mortgage Broker, but it's just telling the tales that will stop people from making the same mistakes that brought other people unstuck. That'd be a good book to write.
I reckon that'd be a great book to write, actually. I'll definitely read it. That's for sure.
Yeah, look, I don't know if I've got time or not, but there's just one classic story that just comes out from being a mortgage broker. But you're right. It'd be a great book. We've had probably.
Come on, you've got to tell us now. You can't start with that.
Look, all right, really quickly. So Guy, very conservative Christian. All right.
Yeah.
So comes to me, and at the time, you might remember this, Matt. There was this thing, sort of rent to buy schemes that were out there that people would sort of buy a property and then on sell it. Anyway, this guy, you're wrapping, yeah. So this guy comes to me and goes, Hamish, I've got this dilemma. I don't know what to do. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he goes, well, I've met this lady and I'd really like to try and help her get into her first home. All right. So, but she's got a bit of a checkered history and I'm not quite sure what to do. And I said, well, but what is the checkered history? I don't quite understand what's going on. And he said, she's have you ever heard the expression, she's a lady of the night? All right. And I said, oh, wow, okay. Where are you going with this? And he said, well, she's not quite earning enough income. And I said, right. And he goes, yeah, so she said to me, I really want this house. I'm happy to work harder, all right, if I can just get the loan. And he just didn't know what to do with that because it was just so against his ethics, his background, So, all right. So, and yeah, that story, I mean, it's got to be 15 years old now, but it's just always stuck with me as being just one of those absolute classics.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one you remember. That's definitely.
He needs to pass it on to someone else and go, here you go, you can take this one.
Anyway, so,
please, what can you do to earn more money? Just a little bit harder.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Anyway.
maybe not that. Maybe.
Let's do mowing.
That's right.
Look, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I've really appreciated all of your professional advice and the stories you've been able to tell us, and it's been really great. So we really appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, fellas. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great.
We're good.
Well, look, at Help My Wealth, we're all about empowering your financial journey. Today we've done that by talking to Matt Ivers about investment properties and where the property market is at the moment in Australia. So I hope that's helped you. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again next time. Yeah. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye. The information discussed by the Help My Wealth and the Money Rules podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only and is general in nature, and it is not advice. It is not intended as a substitute for professional finance, legal or tax advice. It is aimed to provide a general understanding of each topic and should not be relied upon to make an investment or financial decision. It is strongly suggested that you seek professional advice regarding your own individual circumstances before making a financial decision. Help My Wealth and the hosts of the Money Rules podcast are not aware of your personal financial circumstances. Before making any financial decisions, you should read the product disclosure statement and, if necessary, consult a licensed financial professional. Do not take financial advice from a podcast. In the spirit of reconciliation, Help My Wealth and the Money Rules podcasts acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to past, present and emerging elders. We extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today.